Hello and welcome back to the Capital Conference hosted by CoinMarketCap. I'm Samantha Yap. I'm the founder of YAP Global, a PR firm specializing in crypto, DeFi, Web3 projects. And today we're going to be talking about who is funding the metaverse. And I am privileged to introduce my panelists here today. We've got Alvin Kan, Director of Business Operations for BNB Chain. Jane Kurahashi Sofue, VP of Marketing of Avalabs, and Ryan Wyatt, CEO of Polygon Studios. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Excited to get straight into this because I feel like the metaverse, GameFi, play to earn, these buzzwords and terms just kind of exploded in the last year and a half. And there's a lot of money flowing in, but also a lot to kind of unpack to make sense of this ecosystem. Many layers. You have traditional financial banks getting involved to the Web3 protocols getting involved. So, just to begin with, to assess the state of the metaverse, could each of you kind of go around and share, what is the metaverse and, what have you observed in the past year? So Ryan, how about we start with you?
I always love that question because I think we take for granted that people have a lot of different interpretations for it. And oftentimes I notice people are talking past each other because of these different interpretations of it. For me, I've always looked at it actually much more simplistic as just digital worlds, right? And so it's very clear that people are spending more and more time in these digital worlds and experiences. And thus you're starting to see an increase in spend across digital assets. And so that's how I've always kind of interpreted and looked at it. And I think it's interesting because inside of ththese worlds, people often associate it just with like playing video games. They're becoming much more expansive and having much more depth. And so what was interesting, and even when I was at like YouTube, you're starting to actually see metaverses can actually be at odds with some of these video platforms because it's detracting people away from, a desktop experience or a mobile experience. And it's this very immersive experience. And so you're going to start to see applications within these digital worlds, if you will. But this is always kind of how I interpreted it. Others have kind of VR and AR layers to it as well. I've simplified it to just that from my perspective.
Thanks, Ryan. Alvin?
Yeah, I think it's pretty much the same, right? It's basically a virtual world. And I would emphasize on experience, right? You've got to experience like different activities. It's got to be highly experiential. And it doesn't have to be like restricted by hardware like VR and stuff like that, because you can easily be, in experiencing like great, vibes and so on. You could go for a metaverse concert. All those can be done like with or without certain kinds of restrictions. I feel like people put a lot of different definitions around metaverse, and it kinds of, what I would say is a highly experimental phase right now, right? Eventually what the eventual metaverse will look like, nobody knows. But I think in the end, it's, just a highly experiential virtual world that we live in. That's how I would define it.
Yeah, and I think with the 2 points are pretty spot on. That's how I simplify it. I think everyone has their own definitions, which make it really complex to really understand what's actually happening. Every single entity, VC firm will tell you a slightly different definition of metaverse. So I think to build on what Ryan said, it's the digital world. And then to what Alvin said, make sure that there's an experience involved. I think the area that we're kind of leaning towards with Web3 is likely what we're seeing or what we've seen with DeFi, gaming, where Web3 tends to focus on this idea that no one owns this entity called the metaverse, and it's strictly permissionless and accessible for everybody. And so I think that's the key distinction between the quote unquote metaverses that have existed in the past prior to Web3 technology and what we're likely going to be trending towards.
Mm-hmm. I want to go a little deeper. So what does that look like as an experience? Can any of you jump in and share like what's been your personal experience in the metaverse?
I can go first. I think it's got to be highly interactive, right? When we talk about metaverses, people talk about like the hardware, for example, like, can you support like more than 10,000 people? Can you have like proximity of voice and sound and stuff like that? Those are great, right? But in the end, I think even if you go down to like just a small group of people, right? What kind of interactions is possible? Is it real time? People have been, I saw some metaverse concerts where people even make NFTs out of dance moves, right? How interactive are those dance moves, or is everyone moving the same direction? I think a lot of these like smaller details goes into how they experience.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I'm most fascinated that how the world becomes more immersive and what kind of experiences get built within them, as well as how they are more democratized so that you can really empower other developers to build inside of, metaverse experiences. Like, I think that's really how you start to achieve scale. I agree about the permissionless part, the Web3 part being the evolution of kind of metaverse too, because like you can look at Roblox or Minecraft and see a lot of that there, right? There's mods, there's the community participation in the development there. It's open world. Sometimes people are doing a variety of different things, whether it's like PvP mini games, whether they're just building, whether they're truly just quite literally hanging out and talking over, voice chat. That's all of that is an experience, and it lends well to the natural evolution of where the metaverse is going. But now I think, because you're seeing billions of dollars go into the kind of digital universes, if you will, all of a sudden the interoperability part, the having the information on chain, like all this stuff becomes much more important for people. And I think more and more people will begin to realize that as they start to invest more in these experiences. And this is why I was always pretty enamored with the idea of gaming around it, because like, look, you're spending billions of dollars for effectively a digital license, and that's not going to really fly in a metaverse world. That will be a business model that I don't think is going to go anywhere, right? I think there are people that will be fine with the commercial agreement of just like having a license of a cosmetic item, but inside these worlds where there's so much more happening and people are spending so much more time and then caring much more deeply about the representation inside of them, this is going to change that dynamic. So I'm pretty excited, and I think it's happening at a pretty accelerated rate. Nothing happens fast enough for anybody in crypto. I think it's always like, it's got to be now, but it is really cool to see how things are starting to develop.
Yeah, Ryan, it's interesting you mentioned like Roblox. Other companies such as like, Alphabet, Meta, Nvidia, to name a few, they have heavily invested in the metaverse. And, what do you think we're going to see in the coming, weeks and months and years as these large listed companies build a layer of the metaverse?
I think the thing about that is they're just looking at metaverse as another platform for distribution, right? I think that's where it's hard for people to wrap their heads around. Because like, is it a video game? Like, how do I? It's like there are just a lot of people that are going to be participating in it, and you want to be there where the people are. So like going back to using the YouTube example, it's interchangeable with any video platform, right? All of a sudden it's like, oh, people are spending more time in there. We now don't have representation within this platform ecosystem, right? Now, I do believe metaverse is going to be many, right? Worlds, if you will. Some of them will be interconnected, others will not be, right? And so you just have to figure out how you actually show up there. So whether you're Google or you're, Facebook or whatever the case may be, you're going to want to make sure that you are where people are. And there's a lot of people here. And then you have to also realize it's just like time is a scarce resource. It's a finite amount of hours in a day. And so as people become distracted towards these other experiences, this is what's going to happen. It reminds me of even with like Reed Hastings at Netflix, talked about how, this probably wasn't a true statement because they're having all kind of issues, but they were talking about more about how like Fortnite is actually cannibalizing time spent in Netflix more than anything else. And so you really just have, to take any kind of emotion or hyperbole away from it, it is, you've got to be where people are. People are going to spend more time inside of digital worlds. 3 billion gamers, right? You're eventually seeing the lines blur of these are they really even video games at this point? Or is this just another platform where people are spending time? And so if you're any of those big tech companies, you've got to have a Web3 strategy. And even with some of the market pullback, people are like, oh, do you think that, people should still be spending time thinking about it? I actually would say there's like, should be an increased sense of urgency more than ever with this pullback. Because you think about people missing earnings and so forth, like they're going to have to be able to get more creative in where they are monetizing and where they're showing up and where they're participating. So I actually think some of this pullback will be a forcing function for more accelerated Web3 strategies and by big Web2 tech companies, if you will.
Okay, so now we're getting somewhere. So you said something there, Ryan, that there are going to be multiple metaverses and it's about where people are at. So yeah, I think some people think, oh, is it just one big universe, metaverse, whatever you call it, and people are there. It's kind of similar in the crypto space. There's multiple different chains. It's almost like as if they're different countries, different worlds, different metaverses. So interesting to kind of put that into perspective. Jay, in terms of the use cases or ways people are interacting with the metaverse, or I guess games, and you mentioned DeFi there. Could you shed light on what the metaverse can enable in terms of activities,
experiences in general? Yeah,
experiences, activities. Yeah,
totally. So I think Alvin touched on this right now. I think for the foreseeable future, next few years, we're still going to be in the experimental phase. There's going to be, like with any subdivision of Web3, there's going to be a massive influx of activity to probably like a handful of different metaverses or metaverse companies or something that's affiliated. You're then going to have that pullback, and you're going to have that cycle repeat so long as everyone believes in this future. And I think the interesting things that you're seeing right now are what Alvin also mentioned. You need to create in-depth experiences that are meaningful. What does that mean? Does that mean your friends are incorporated in these worlds? Does that mean that it's actually fun, like a game? It doesn't necessarily have to be, but that's also a way to make the worlds a little bit stickier. Is there a brand affinity? Are there major brands like Ryan's talking about that have massive presences in them? So if, let's say it's like a consumer-facing brand, maybe it's like a drinks company or something. Is it because you really love that company and you're loyal to it and you want to be present when they have online activities, for example? And so it's really, I think, about bringing people closer together, similar to how we've moved into this very hyper digital space of kind of just like constant video chats and constant lobbies, where I feel like 3-4 years ago, prior to the pandemic, we still had these technologies, we had these platforms, but it wasn't like every single person was aware about it. And it also, the social constructs didn't really exist. It's kind of like the silly things of like, I don't know, like having your mic muted and you just don't understand why you're not being heard by anybody, or more on a serious note, maybe just bringing people together and talking about things when you're friends all the way across the world. And I think that connectivity was step one. Now, I think, going back to your question, Samantha, earlier about what we're seeing in the metaverse, I think what resonates with me the most, especially as someone who grew up with a lot of these early digital games, especially these massive multiplayer online games, it kind of reminds me of the times where you're playing games like World of Warcraft and RuneScape. You're walking around and you have these identities that really mean something to you, but it also isn't necessarily exactly you, right? It's kind of like a character avatar or something like that. And so you can really have this effectively second version of you, and that's just as meaningful as your current version. And so I think what will happen is there's certain things that we can't possibly imagine. There might be a time where you could potentially be a leader of a community within the metaverse, and in real life, in the physical world, you might be an accountant, for example. And so I think it gives people a lot more opportunities to effectively to basically remix their own brand. Right now, if you look at all of us, we have our own brand. It's Ryan, Alvin, myself, you, Samantha. That's what people know us as. But maybe in Metaverse A, you might be known as a wizard. I don't know, that's a gaming, I guess, example. But on the other side, you might be known as just a judge because you're trying to monitor the legalities of that exact ecosystem. So I feel like it's really just a replication of current experiences in the physical world, but then level that up to a place where it's not quite clear what it looks like. But I think it will be very similar to some of the things that we've been imagining, especially in the way we tell stories, especially the way games tell those stories, something that's out of this world, which is quite fascinating.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jay. I'm glad you touched on that, because just trying to understand there, I know, Alvin, you brought up being in a virtual conference or a concert, but I think gaming is where it's going to start. Andreessen Horowitz recently launched a $600 million fund. Other VCs and funds have also, announced that they're investing into GameFi and play to earn gaming, believing that this is going to be the key building block of the metaverse. What do you guys see as the potential of GameFi, and what do you think has made it explode so much? Like the money poured in is huge in the past few months, I think. Anyone can take this. Alvin, if you want to jump in.
Why GameFi came up, there were many reasons, right? Starting from where, you know, it just took Philippines by storm, right, with Axie Infinity. And at that time, because of economic circumstances and like the game came out at the right time. But why I feel like it's so important is if you look at Web3, right, and it started with DeFi, and people understand like, all right, crypto tokens, and many of the retail people may see it as, all right, this is opportunistic and so on. But GameFi, when it came up, it showed a very clear use case of why blockchain and, you know, this whole point of decentralization is so important, that you could actually like own your skins and your weapons and your avatars in the game, right, and be able to trade it and so on. Like it showed a very clear use case of why blockchain and, or rather the Web3 economy, you know, cryptocurrencies should exist. That to me has always been, you know, when I talk to like other VCs or investors, like they understand that this is the application moving forward. I do think though that like this trend will stay, but there's a lot more like SocialFi, you know, and people have been like X to earn, right? Move to earn, learn to earn. A lot of more of these applications is going to come up. I think what GameFi showed was kind of a first proof of concept that this works, and that this makes sense with the Web3 economy.
On that, you know, what do you guys think of the, you know, move to earn, play to earn games that are coming up? Are we still in the experimental phase, or where do you see that heading?
I think they're cool, but I think we are still in the experimental phase. There's a lot of hype going around them. I also think that emphasizing the earn part, I think really was a distraction for the last few years. If you have all these different games, for example, and you have quite a big amount of attention that's focused on them, but you couldn't really discern, especially as an investor, but also just as a user, what signal is good and bad, or what's authentic and what's there just because of the monetary opportunities. I think monetary opportunities are perfectly fine to have. But if you're thinking of a game, that should be the secondary point. The first point should really be what games are there for. It should be fun. And so the thing I personally say, especially with that the gaming background, just from a user perspective, is Web3 games need to just focus on the simple goal of it being fun. I know that's something that's amongst all these other different focus areas, like token economics, how the distribution works, what kind of players are involved, what are the player dynamics. So there's a bunch of different complexities there. But I also still think like, hey, like we really need to get back to the basics, and perhaps this market pullback will kind of force a lot of these games to really focus in on, because they're not going to be able to get users simply by throwing money at the wall. They're going to actually have to bring users in from the experience side and authentic, I guess, the strategy that's authentic to games.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jay. I think that games also need to be fun, also quality games as well. That's why seeing, you know, more like established gaming companies entering the space might change things up. And you did mention there is a lot of hype here. Do you guys see that? GameFi is just another next trend for VCs to invest in, or is there really something there, or do you think that it'll take a while for the market to settle until we're going to see some quality projects come out?
I think like there's a couple things here on the X to earn thing. You know, a lot of those applications are like littered with like Ponzi-nomics, and so actually figuring out how to make that. And I don't mean that. And I think it's just that's kind of how that's the function of it. So how you get it to work, like certainly having a good product. I also think, to Jay's point, the terminology is pretty poor. Like, you know, ultimately these are like reward-based programs, you know, that are happening inside of these financialization first dynamics. So TBD on some of it. I do think, you know, some of the stuff will rise to the top. Like there's definitely an X to earn, you know, opportunity that will find its way through some of these different growing pains. On the GameFi side, like, the reason, you know, it is what it is today right now is because a lot of the first movers in game development were people that focused on like the DeFi financialization first element and kind of, you know, pushed games out to market quick. So they're all pretty rudimentary, you know, like Axie Infinity kind of being like the golden child of the first era of Web3 games. And that's not a really exciting, fun game to play. They're working on that, and they're kind of figuring out how do we make the game mechanics more fun, more visually appealing, and are continuing to iterate. So I think that's great. You'll see more of that. But the games that are high quality, high polished, that are going to like hook and sink a large majority of these 3 billion gamers that are the total addressable market, are multi-year game development cycles. So I actually don't really think you see a meaningful breakthrough in Web3 games until like this time next year, where you actually start to see some of these games that are going to come out, and gamers, to Jay's point, they're just going to be good games. And so this NFT argument and these Web3 arguments and crypto and blockchain ones kind of fall to the wayside when you're like, oh, it's just a game I want to play, right? So I'll go through the onboarding flow to do it. And then the last thing on like the A16 kind of commentary, in general, we've never seen in the history of gaming this much capital deployed from the private sector into the games industry. So you have these weird movements that are like, one, you see massive consolidation of big game publishers and M&As that are happening there. Microsoft, emptying a big part of their cash flow in order to make an acquisition, and you see Take-Two, Zynga, all these other ones. And then on top of that, you're seeing massive amount of capital, like billions and billions of dollars, right, from all these different funds going into gaming, right? And then you have obviously these crypto funds that have disproportionately invested a lot into gaming as well. And we really haven't talked about the outcome of that, because that will take time, right? You haven't seen, 90% of the capital that's been deployed by venture capital in gaming, you haven't seen the product yet, right? You then see Andreessen go raise another, whatever it was, 4 billion on top of billions, whatever. I can't keep track of how many billions they have now, but like, I have no doubt that crypto fund will deploy into gaming as well on top of that $700 or $600 million fund. All that to say is there's going to be a ton of gaming products over the next like 2 to 4 years in a way that we've never seen before. And the optionality that gamers will have will be at the highest ever, which will force actually, I think, a lot of fragmentation in gaming, which I think is, again, a really good thing. And then the last thing on kind of games that's really interesting for me is Web3 games can start monetizing so easily with their community that they don't need a big community to thrive, right? You can actually have a community of like tens of thousands of people and have a studio that's self-sustainable, have a token that actually allows you to kind of operate a business and have a treasury and really monetize that well. So I think that's a really interesting part of it, is you don't have to be the next Riot Games in order to be a successful game studio in the Web3 environment. And I don't think we talk about that a lot. So there's a lot of interesting things happening, but it's some of the stuff won't emerge over the next, for another 12 to 18 months. So part of being in this bear market, the irony and everything always says like, build during this time. There's some real truth to that the pullback will bring people looking for actual fundamentals moving forward, will be wiser in the decision-making that they're doing, more principled in their investments. And I can definitely say that will be a net positive long-term on the space.
No, thanks for that overview, Ryan. Good shift in perspective on what's going on. What do you guys think is the biggest mistake or assumption you see people make when they invest in the metaverse or GameFi?
I think one that stands out to me is, especially as a marketer, the idea that AAA rated games just instantly means that it's a good game from a experience perspective. AAA is commentary on its quality and how the graphics look effectively. And it really doesn't have, like with a lot of different kind of marketing jargon, it doesn't really have like a strict guideline on what that exactly means. And so I think in the bull market, you always saw, or the past bull market, I guess, you saw a lot of different games advertising themselves as, oh, well, we have, play to earn, one buzzword. Another one's like integrated on whatever chain it may be. So that was another one. And then usually the third one would be AAA rated. And to be honest, none of those things really make the game fun or engaging at all. That's not to say that AAA rated games can't be fun. Of course, there are plenty of AAA rated games in traditional industry that are doing very, very well and have a huge, huge fan base. So I think that's usually, I guess, like goes without saying with any other industry or division. And especially when you're investing in it, like go a little bit deeper than the headline. The headline should be something that piques your interest to look into it, but I don't think it should determine your investment thesis or lean into it rather.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to say, I fully agree with that because that conversation keeps coming up as well, right? Good graphics, wow, this looks great. And the thing is, it's always about meaningful interactions, right? It's as good. Maybe this analogy is a bit far away, but you don't have to go to the fanciest restaurant to have a good, interaction and experience, right? So how you design the experience is a lot more than just the graphics itself. And I think the other thing to add on, probably not so much of a mistake, but there's been a lot of metaverses and games that have come out, and I think especially with kind of the market right now, people will be starting to concentrate their efforts and start asking, where's the product roadmap? What are the milestones that needs to be delivered? I think there's going to be pressure on metaverses and games to actually show this over the next few months.
I agree with you on the graphics part. It's a pretty boomer take. Like Minecraft is the biggest game of all time. It's still the #1 game on YouTube, and I don't think anybody's arguing that that's a graphically compelling game.
So yeah, just taking a quick step back away from gaming, but just back to to metaverse as a concept and a term. So I guess we have kind of come to the conclusion, if you want to call it, that there's going to be multiple metaverses. It's not just one place. But what do you guys think of say banks? Like I think JP Morgan, was one of the first banks to kind of buy land in one of the metaverses earlier this year, and then other banks started to follow. So you're starting to see these traditional banks kind of jumping in. Do you think they're just doing it because it's a trend, kind of like how Visa bought a CryptoPunk, or do you foresee more brands entering into getting virtual land?
I think oh, go ahead, Jen.
Well, it's going to echo what you said too earlier, Ryan, actually. So maybe it might be something similar to what you're going to say. But to Ryan's exact point, I think it's a little bit of all of that, Samantha. But earlier, Ryan mentioned if you're a big brand, especially if you're a Fortune 100 or Fortune 500 brand, it's a distribution opportunity. So I don't know if the banks exactly know what they want to do, but at least they need to get one foot in the door. And then after they understand the space a little bit better, maybe the opportunities shine itself, especially the next couple of years as people start deploying more and more solutions, then I think they're going to be able to be a little bit more nimble since they already have one foot in the door rather than kind of sitting on the sidelines. And because these banks have a lot of capital and have a lot of resources, they're able to take these risks as opposed to maybe if you're like a startup and you can't really hedge beyond the one direction that you're going in.
Yeah, I think in general, you already have now this idea, if crypto is going to be around or not, shouldn't really be a conversation. I think that's kind of our early product market fit. You already have, 12, 13% of the US that have adopted or used it in 22. So at this point, you have now shifted your conversation. If you're at a JP Morgan of, is this a thing to, it is a thing. It's going to be a thing. We don't know how big the thing will be. It could be revolutionary in monetization, and therefore we should have a ton of exposure to it. But if I'm at JP Morgan right now, I definitely want some exposure to crypto, and I want a lot of people that know about it really well too, because that's the other thing. You have to think about the employee talent retention as well too, right? Like making sure that you get into these efforts so that you keep these folks within your organization. So yeah, they have really no choice. It doesn't matter what they personally think about it at this point. You need exposure to crypto if you're any of the major banks at this point. It'll also allow you to pivot and move faster. And if all of a sudden we come out of the recession and say crypto booms very fast because people really start having all these issues with the fiat and kind of what we're doing with printing money and yada yada, you want to be ready and positioned to be able to handle some of that. And so yeah, it's good that they're staying hedged and participating.
Mm-hmm. And I think we are running out of time, but that's a really good point to end on. Thank you guys. Thank you, Alvin, Jay, and Ryan for your thoughts. And I think, as Ryan, you mentioned, it's going to be another year or so until we're going to see some products coming out. So let's look into this next phase of building and look forward to what we're going to see next year. Thank you guys for this discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Sam.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.